A 2-year health crisis over. Why local health officials say they can now move away from the hepatitis A outbreak. And sidestepping the Constitution. President Donald Trump says he has the authority to decide if the U.S. should grant birthright citizenship.
We all felt it was important to come together as a community, to stand shoulder to shoulder with other communities of faith.
A show of support. Hundreds of San Diegans turn out to remember those lost in the deadly synagogue attack.
If the tax measure passes, we'll start accepting licenses in early January. If it doesn't, then they'll continue to be illegal in Chula Vista.
And cannabis on the ballot. We'll wrap up the different marijuana measures voters will decide in our area. KPBS Evening Edition starts right now. Good evening, and thanks for joining us. I'm Ebony Monet. 1 week before the midterm election, President Donald Trump continues his focus on immigration. In an interview with Axios, a new political show on HBO, the president claimed he can end birthright citizenship with an executive order.
On immigration, some legal scholars believe you can get rid of birthright citizenship without changing the Constitution.
With an executive order.
Exactly.
Right.
Have you thought about that?
Yes.
Tell me more.
It was always told to me that you needed a constitutional amendment.
Right.
Guess
14th
what?
Amendment.
You don't.
You don't.
Number one, you don't need that. Number two,
I mean, that's in dispute.
You could definitely
that's very much in dispute.
Well, you can definitely do it with an act of Congress, but now they're saying I can do it just with an executive order. Now, how ridiculous. We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it has to end.
The 14th Amendment ensures anyone born in the U.S. is granted citizenship. Dozens of countries around the world have similar laws. President Trump did not say when he would issue an executive order. Such a move would likely bring a series of lawsuits. If President Trump tried to limit birthright citizenship, he wouldn't be the first politician to do so. KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman has more on the legality of the move and the effect it could have.
San Diego County Congressman Duncan D. Hunter and Darrell Issa have taken similar stances regarding birthright citizenship. In 2009, both representatives co-sponsored a bill that would change the interpretation of the 14th Amendment. The bill said a person would only be subject to the jurisdiction of the United States if at least one of their parent is already a citizen, a lawfully admitted immigrant for permanent status, or an alien in the military. The bill was introduced on the House floor but never made it out of committee. Now President Trump is saying he's considering an executive order to end birthright citizenship from non-citizens.
Immigrants built this country, immigrants are a foundation of this country.
Legal director for the ACLU of San Diego and Imperial Counties, David Loy, believes the only way to alter the 14th Amendment would be to amend the Constitution, something that requires congressional and state approval.
No president can erase the Constitution. I think it's transparently political grandstanding to sow division and hatred in advance of the election. And it's just based in pure xenophobia, and it's got no basis in law.
UC San Diego professor of sociology John Screntny echoed those comments, saying, quote, "This is an obvious attempt by a divisive president to divide us on a new topic, cast his party as defending the nation, and force Democrats and you, the media, to talk about something." Republican Senator from South Carolina and Trump ally Lindsey Graham says he will introduce legislation similar to Trump's proposed executive order. Meantime, California Senator Dianne Feinstein addressed the issue while campaigning in San Diego today. The Democrat believes the president can't take away protections guaranteed by the 14th Amendment.
You need a lot of votes to amend the Constitution, and they won't be there to do this, I assure you of that.
The ACLU says if the president were to sign an executive order, they would look at all their legal options. Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
This is yet another provocative proposal on the campaign trail. To see how voters are responding, KPBS reporter Susan Murphy checks in with Lisa Desjardins from PBS NewsHour.
Lisa Desjardins, welcome. What campaign narrative is the president crafting with a proposal like ending birthright citizenship?
think the president knows that the top-rated issue for Republicans this year is immigration. And of course, that was one of the issues that propelled him into the White House itself. So when he talks about birthright citizenship and isn't making a distinct proposal yet, he's not actually taking something to Congress, he's not putting out the order yet, he's just indicating he's thinking about it. This is something that seems to be aimed at voters right now, especially Republican voters.
Also from the White House, we're seeing what appears to be an election season response to the migrant caravan from Central America. President Trump announced he's sending 5,200 troops to the border to respond to the men, women, and children who are seeking asylum. How does this extreme military action help revitalize his base ahead of Election Day?
The Trump base feels that the border is not secure. They are concerned about the level of illegal immigration. And so this is a direct answer to that. This is to say to them, listen, I think we need to shore up the border, on one hand. On the other hand, those who are opponents of President Trump say this is just stoking fear and trying to kind of make more of a problem than really exists. This caravan are people that we know, reporters who've been traveling with this caravan say this is largely families. These are people who are peaceful and that they plan to ask for asylum. That is something that is their legal right, and that is something that is part of U.S. law. They have ways of doing that, coming into this country without doing it illegally. But the president is sort of obviously casting question marks about how many asylum seekers should be allowed in and whether the people in this caravan have pure intent. That's something the president's opponents say is directly misleading, and that some are saying that he's even kind of race baiting as he looks at this caravan and talks about Middle Easterners perhaps being in the caravan, something of which we don't have any proof at this time.
And President Trump has attacked the media on Twitter in the wake of the mass shooting in Pittsburgh and a mail bomb plot against high-profile Democrats. What are you seeing from sources or voters while on assignment? Any backlash in the light of these comments?
Right. The president and the White House have blamed two different places or people for the attack in Pittsburgh. One, the assailant himself, the suspect who's now in custody, and the other one being the media. The president wrote on Twitter that the great anger in this country has been caused in part by inaccurate and fraudulent reporting. Repeatedly asked by reporters whether the president's own rhetoric, which is certainly has kind of been hostile to different groups in this country sometimes, the White House has said no, that the president has simply been defending himself and that he has a right to do that. They said they placed blame mostly on the gunmen in these attacks. You know, I think there's no doubt that the president in some way is trying to direct the narrative this election season. Now, is it a risk when he goes to Pittsburgh at a time when there are still families grieving and burying their dead, and the mayor of Pittsburgh has asked President Trump not to go? That is a risk. And in fact, we know the four main leaders of Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, the House Speaker Paul Ryan and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, have declined to go with the president to Pittsburgh. Most of those leaders have said it's a scheduling problem. Nancy Pelosi said she specifically is not attending right now out of respect for the wishes of city leaders. Though it's certainly, he's doing what he wants to do, but it is something that is dividing the Pittsburgh community, this visit by the president.
Lisa Desjardins with the PBS NewsHour. Thank you.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Tonight on the NewsHour, a city mourns. President Trump visits Pittsburgh as funerals begin for those murdered at the synagogue. Coming up at 7 after Evening Edition on KPBS.
Today in Pittsburgh, the first funeral was held for one of the 11 people killed in last weekend's synagogue attack. Mourners gathered at a Jewish community center to remember Dr. Jerry Rabinowitz. The 66-year-old was a primary care physician, and many of his patients came to pay respects. Later in the day, President Donald Trump visited the Tree of Life Synagogue. He and First Lady Melania Trump laid white roses and a stone for each victim at a makeshift memorial. Here in San Diego, hundreds of people gathered at Congregation Beth Israel. KPBS reporter Priya Sridhar has more on the local support for the Jewish community.
It was a packed house at Congregation Beth Israel of San Diego. Community members poured outside the building listening to the vigil on speakers.
Love, peace. We all felt it was important to come together as a community, to stand shoulder to shoulder with other communities of faith, and to stand in solidarity and show our support as well as mourn for the loss of life in Pittsburgh.
San Diego's mayor, police chief, and sheriff joined together with interfaith leaders to condemn what's being called the deadliest attack on Jewish people in the United States.
And we stand with them proudly to say that anti-Semitism, racism, bigotry, not only is it unacceptable, it is profoundly un-American.
The Anti-Defamation League of San Diego organized the vigil. They say they've seen an almost 60% rise nationally in anti-Semitic incidents in 2017.
The rhetoric that we see in our country right now, the dehumanization of people, the normalization of hate, we want to see that stop, and every person can make a difference in that.
It was an evening of song and prayer. While some say they were afraid, many believe that the love on display at the vigil gave them hope.
I do feel scared, like as a Jew, but I also do still feel very comfortable. I live in San Diego, a much more open, respectful place, and I go to a school where everyone is accepted.
They say their faith will help them get through this tragedy. Priya Sridhar, KPBS News.
Another vigil to honor the victims is being held tonight at Temple Adat Shalom in Poway. It starts at 7 o'clock, but people are encouraged to arrive a bit early. Local health officials have formally announced an end to the local hepatitis A outbreak. San Diego County's public health officer says it's been more than 100 days since the most recent case. 20 people died and nearly 600 were sickened by the outbreak. It was first detected back in November of 2016 and was linked to unsanitary conditions in the homeless population. In the final week of the campaign, the race for Congress in East County is tightening. A new poll by 10 News shows Congressman Duncan Hunter's lead is now just 3% over Democratic candidate Amar Campanajjar. A poll conducted in August showed an 8-point lead for Hunter. Hunter is facing trial for alleged misuse of campaign funds, a claim he denies. 53% of those questioned, though, by this new poll say they believe Hunter broke the law. Amar Campanajjar is among a large field of candidates of color running for offices big and small across America. AP reporter Noreen Nasser has more on the barriers they will work to try to break on Election Day.
In a head-to-head gubernatorial battle in Georgia, Democrat Stacey Abrams is vying to become the first black female governor in the U.S. But her run against Republican Brian Kemp is shedding a spotlight on who has access to the polls.
Voter suppression isn't only about blocking the vote. It's also about creating an atmosphere of fear, making people worry that their votes won't count.
Hello, you've reached the Election Protection Hotline.
The National Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under Law in Washington is keeping track of infringements on voting rights.
Most certainly, Georgia is ground zero when it comes to voter suppression this election cycle.
Kemp is Georgia's current Secretary of State and oversees voter registration and elections. A recent report by the Associated Press showed that more than 53,000 voter applications were on hold in the state ahead of Election Day. Nearly 70% of those were from black applicants. Kemp has denied allegations of voter suppression and spun Abrams' agenda as too extreme for Georgians. The battle for Georgia's gubernatorial seat is emblematic of a number of races across the country in which candidates of color are making strides in record numbers and initiating a wave of firsts across the country. In Michigan, former state lawmaker Rashida Tlaib is poised to become the first Palestinian American in the House of Representatives.
If we want to be able to have a seat at the table, then we're going to have to run. That people like us with unique names and different backgrounds and children of immigrants and all those things that I think makes us uniquely different and our lens very different to finally run for office.
In that refugee camp. Another Muslim woman, Minnesota State Legislator Ilhan Omar, hopes to be the first Somali American in Congress. She's also a refugee. And in New Mexico, Democrat Deborah Haaland is trying to become the nation's first Native American woman elected to the House.
There's never been a Native American woman. There's nobody that looks like me.
But not everyone is celebrating the rise in new voices.
It's also been a new development that I think has been met with intense fear among elected officials who are very concerned about locking in the status quo and making it harder for new voices to be heard this election cycle.
Well, hello there.
A racist robocall targeting Tallahassee's Democratic Mayor Andrew Gillum in his bid for Florida's governor made the rounds recently, featuring a voice claiming to be the nominee, speaking in a demeaning minstrel dialect sounding nothing like him. His opponent, Ron DeSantis, denounced the call. Gillum is well aware that his win would be groundbreaking as the state's first black governor, and he isn't afraid to comment on the way racism has permeated his run against DeSantis.
He's got neo-Nazis helping him out in this state. Now, I'm not calling Mr. DeSantis a racist. I'm simply saying the racists believe he's a racist.
In Southern California's most Republican congressional district, a young Latino Arab-American Democrat is gaining surprising ground. But Amar Campanejar's opponent has raised concerns over his racial background.
A Palestinian-Mexican millennial Democrat named Amar Campanejar doesn't get his support from the people of San Diego.
Back in Georgia, Abrams knows her campaign rests heavily on turning out unlikely voters as she seeks to make gains in a dead heat race that could have a historic outcome. Noreen Nasser, The Associated Press.
Next week, voters in 3 local cities will have a say on cannabis-related measures. KPBS reporter Matt Hoffman says they have to deal with legalization, retail sales, and taxing pot.
The Grove is La Mesa's first legal medical marijuana dispensary. Once customers get past the armed guard outside, they're asked to show a medical recommendation.
You'll come in, you'll be approached by one of our greeters. Right now it's me. I'll get your identification. I'll verify that it is indeed active.
Sean McDermott owns the dispensary.
Once you've done that, you'll be allowed to get buzzed in, which come on in.
This isn't your typical dispensary. The Grove is building a brand. A green and white paint job is accompanied by wall-mounted flat-screen TVs, and most products are kept in sleek LED-lit cases.
And there's a big comfort level for people. They see from outside, they can see all the way into the shop. It's not hidden and secret.
The Grove opened this August, but getting the store open wasn't easy.
The process to become licensed was tough. It took us 2 years. Pretty heavy-duty background check.
Along with the Grove, La Mesa has a handful of medical marijuana dispensaries set to open soon, with more going through the application process.
I totally think that each city is looking at marijuana, and some cities are saying stay away with a 10-foot pole, and then some cities are like, how can we make our money on that right now?
This November, voters in La Mesa will be asked to vote on a cannabis business tax. If passed, it would add up to a 6% tax on sales.
There's a number there that the public can tolerate. You know, everybody understands there needs to be a tax involved. I think the tax is a good thing. It's going to be spent positively.
The city of Chula Vista also has a similar cannabis business tax heading to voters this year.
If you tax too high, you push everybody to the black market.
Chula Vista Deputy City Manager Kelly Bacon says it would allow for dispensaries to open up inside the city.
If the tax measure passes, we'll start accepting licenses in early January. If it doesn't, then they'll continue to be illegal in Chula Vista.
Measure Q would impose at least a 5% but no more than 15% tax on sales. Back in March, Chula Vista City Council voted to allow recreational cannabis businesses in the city, but that ordinance is contingent on Measure Q passing. The city says Measure Q could eventually raise $6 million a year, which they say would go towards shutting down illegal dispensaries.
We probably have somewhere between 13 and 15 still open today that have popped up at various times.
3rd Avenue in Chula Vista is littered with illegal dispensaries.
They make it look like it's legal. They put big signs, they put flashing signs, arrows pointing, park here, come on in here, but they are absolutely illegal.
McDermott believes underground operations make cities uneasy about legalizing the sale of cannabis.
They've been bad neighbors, and they've pissed off the police department, they've pissed off the public, and so they've made it really difficult to get the city to believe that we can be good neighbors.
Then there's voters in Vista who will see 3 cannabis-related measures in November. Measure Z is a citizens' initiative that would bring up to 11 medical marijuana storefronts to Vista.
The city doesn't know.
It's backed by Vistans for Safe Community Access, a group led by former Vista City Councilman Cody Campbell.
A brick-and-mortar storefront has far greater ability to implement enforcement
oversight.
In response to the Citizens Initiative, the city worked to put out their own cannabis measure on the ballot.
I worry most about the kids.
Vista Mayor Judy Ritter says Measure BB would allow up to 3 medical marijuana delivery businesses and no storefronts.
After the initiative came out, we decided that we needed to put something on the ballot to give people a choice. Right. So if they didn't want 11 dispensaries, but there are people that want the medical and want access to that. So that's why we did that, so they would have access.
Vista says over the years they have closed at least 50 illegal dispensaries. City-sponsored Measure AA would tax marijuana between 3.5% for testing and up to 12% for retail stores.
The question that voters are going to have to ask themselves is, do we really want to have delivery services regulated by the city, roaming around the city, not knowing where the sales are occurring, what they're actually selling?
Ritter says she prefers delivery and says she recognizes there are benefits from medical marijuana.
For seizures and for cancer patients, and so there's a lot of good that comes of that. So I'm not totally anti-marijuana.
We would give them this, they can see it, they can smell it.
Back at the Grove in La Mesa, McDermott says business is good.
Relief capsules. Okay, yeah, definitely.
It might surprise you, but he says his average customer is 57 years old.
And it's a pineapple coconut flavor.
And half of the sales aren't actual buds, it's vapes and waxes. There's also more unusual marijuana items here, like dog shampoo and cannabis-infused soap. You'll see another Grove popping up soon. McDermott hopes to have his Lemon Grove location open by the end of this year.
Have a good rest of your day, man.
Bye, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Matt Hoffman, KPBS News.
You can get ready for the election with the KPBS Voter Guide. We have a link right on our homepage. It's a partnership with Voters Edge California. You'll find information on all the races and candidates right now at kpbs.org. This week, Frontline is investigating the impact of social media on the election. The Facebook Dilemma examines the social network's impact on privacy and democracy in the U.S. and around the world. Here's a preview of Part 2, which airs tonight.
In advance of next week's midterms, Facebook has mobilized an election team to monitor false news stories and delete fake accounts that may be trying to influence voters. Nathaniel Gleischer runs the team.
There are going to be actors that are going to try to manipulate that public debate. And how do we figure out what are the techniques they're using and how do we make it much harder?
Is there going to be real-time monitoring on Election Day of what's going on Facebook? And how are you going to actually find things that may sow distrust in the election?
Absolutely. We're going to have a team on Election Day focused on that problem. And one thing that's useful here is we've already done this in other elections.
And you're confident you can do that here?
I think that, yes, I'm confident that we can do this here.
Gleischer says his team continues to find foreign actors using the platform to spread disinformation.
Iran was revealed to be a new player in worldwide disinformation campaigns, and on top of this...
And less than 2 weeks ago, federal prosecutors announced they'd found evidence that Russian operatives have been trying to interfere in next week's election.
What is the standard that the public should hold Facebook to in terms of solving some of these seemingly enormous problems?
I think the standard, the responsibility, what I'm focused on is amplifying good and minimizing the bad. And we need to be transparent about what we're doing on both sides. And, I think this is an ongoing discussion.
What's an ongoing discussion?
How we're doing on minimizing the bad.
The Facebook Dilemma airs tonight at 10 on KPBS. You can watch Part 1 of the documentary on pbs.org.
Good afternoon. I hope you had a wonderful day today. There's not much going on here across San Diego County, except it is pretty dry. Dew points in places like San Diego in the low 20s, but once you get into those interior areas like Ramona, for example, or Alpine, those dew points, they're in the single digits. So it's pretty dry out there. Turn on those humidifiers overnight and make sure you're staying nice and hydrated and moisturized. Here's a big picture of the Southwest. Just a little bit of activity happening near the Four Corners. but not much happening here in California. It is going to be a bit breezy to the north of us, and we'll notice the winds picking up here tomorrow. For tonight, it's going to be clear across the county, really. Oceanside at 45 degrees, El Cajon at 53, and Borrego Springs coming in at 52 for the lows. Tonight in the metro, patchy low clouds at first, breaking up for some sunshine throughout the day at 59 for the low. We have a high pressure system in place that is whipping up the winds. It is dry and breezy, and tomorrow we could see some wind gusts in the low 20s all across the county. So not a windy day, but certainly a breezy one where you will feel those wind gusts from time to time. And it's going to be sunny. Look at all that sunshine. Borrego Springs, a high of 82, Ramona at 81, San Diego at 76, and Oceanside 77. Pretty typical temperatures along the coast. Here's the big picture of what's going on late week across the country. It is a wet mess on the East Coast, but in the Southwest, it is looking warm and dry with plenty of sunshine. Here's the 5-day for the coast. Nice sun through Sunday. Temperatures getting a bit warmer by Friday, but then cooling back down the rest of the weekend. Inland will be in the 80s all week. Again, the peak will be on Friday at 86 degrees. In the mountains, it's going to be sunny, and temperature is very comfortable in the 60s. In the deserts, it's in the 80s with our lows in those 50s with plenty of sunshine. For KPBS News, I'm Erin Calandra. Back to you.
The San Diego Zoo has had to say goodbye to one of its giant pandas. Gao Gao is on his way back to his native China tonight. He has been living at the San Diego Zoo for the past 15 years, and during that time, he fathered 5 cubs. Gao Gao's return to China is part of the zoo's loan agreement with the Chinese government. You can find tonight's stories on our website, kpbs.org/evening edition. Thanks for joining us. Have a great night.